Hello and welcome to AWS Summit Online. Jim Barksdale, former CEO of Netscape, famously said, "If we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, well, let's just go with mine." My name is Ishit Vajrajani. I'm an enterprise strategist with AWS. We are a team of former customer CXOs who have led major transformation of our businesses using AWS Cloud. We now work with executives from some of the world's largest companies and help them with strategies to transform their business. And as you can imagine, the topic of becoming a data-driven enterprise comes up very often in these conversations. Now, we have often heard data being described as an asset. But then companies have many different assets. We have factories, IP, people, retail shops, locations. Data is unlike a lot of these assets. Data is also famously compared with oil. And now I know that that comparison is to signify how valuable data is. There are unique differences between data and all other type of assets like oil. For example, other assets are fixed in supply. Data, on the other hand, is limitless. In fact, with more of world's population coming online, getting connected, more and more devices from smart factories to home automation getting connected, we are producing more data than ever before. The other difference is that the other type of assets are also not distributed evenly. In fact, sometimes you're lucky if you have that asset or not. Data, on the other hand, is a great leveler. It is available to everyone because every business and every company produces data in the process of running their business, interacting with their customers, delivering product and services to their customers. It's about making a choice to put that data to use. If you transact using other type of assets, you typically transfer the ownership of that asset in exchange of some value. Data, on the other hand, allows you to exchange value while retaining ownership of that. So you can choose to share data in exchange of some value while keeping the ownership. It is somewhat like having your cake and eating it too. The fundamental way, though, data is different is that the more data that you use, the more you create. It's a self-replenishing asset. Now, one could argue that companies have always used data, and that's true. So why are we talking about becoming data-driven now? If we look at the history, data was used to look back at what had already happened. And typically this was for senior executives looking at financial and operational data in static batch reports, just looking at past performance. That changed with interactive queries and data warehousing, where we got an ability to monitor what was going on in our business. And we created new functions that we call power users. These were folks that sat in sales or marketing or finance and understood their business, but they also understood how they use data. That gave us better ability to monitor our businesses in real time. But data was still in silos. It was still very hard to connect the dots across the entire enterprise. And that is where cloud has fundamentally changed how we look at data. With cloud, it is easier than ever before to store, process, and analyze massive amount of data. And so you don't have to do a trade-off. You can put all of your data to use. And that data can be made available to everyone in the company. And that data can be used not just to look at what had already happened, what is happening right now, but in fact to guide what you should be doing. And actually guide not just human, but even use machine learning and AI and use data as a foundation of building AI and machine learning to guide your business. And that's why we are talking about becoming data-driven now. In this session, we're going to talk about what does it mean to become data-driven, and then share some examples of companies adopting becoming data-driven enterprise in different ways. The question that is fortunately not asked often is why is it a good thing to become a data-driven enterprise? But it is still a good reminder before we jump into how do you become data-driven to talk about what does it mean and why is it a good thing for the company. Now, it's obvious that data helps us make better decisions. But what is important is that data helps us make these better decisions faster. And speed matters in business. It's not only important to get these decisions right, it's also important to make those decisions fast. Data allows us to respond to unexpected events much better. It's impossible to predict some of the events that are happening. But data allows us to pick up early trends, pick up signals, or look at how our response to this event is yielding results, and then course correct. Data allows us to build relationship with our consumers and deeply understand what customers care for, and then use that understanding to create amazing experiences in product. These products can help you uncover new revenue opportunities, but data can also be used to improve the supply chain through automation and gain efficiency in your business. One example that I love about a company using data to create amazing customer experiences is Formula One. And how can we talk about Formula One without looking at one of those amazing pit stop videos? So let's have a look. Well, in case you were keeping counts, that was a little over 1.5 second pit stop. That's fascinating. How does Formula One do that? Well, Formula One uses data as a fuel to create these experiences. They have sensors all around the cars, but also sensors all around the tracks. And they collect over 1 million data points during a race from 120 different sensors from these cars as well as tracks in real time. Now, this data was always available to the teams and the drivers to improve their performance. But what Formula One has done is they've combined this real-time data with over 69 years of historical data stored on Amazon S3, and then used that data to build machine learning models using Amazon SageMaker to create predictions around pit strategy, overtake probability, which is then shown to the viewer, so that as a viewer, you get a really first-hand view of what is going through the minds of drivers and the team as they're making these critical decisions. Let's take a look at how overtake probability works in action. So here are two drivers approaching a turn, and they're battling out, and you will see on the lower right of your screen the overtake probability changing in real time based on the actions that those drivers are taking. Let's take a look. Well, regardless of who you were rooting for there, it's fascinating to see based on different actions and as they're approaching the turn, the overtake probability changing in real time. So that's a fantastic example of using both real-time and historical data to build amazing customer experiences. So a data-driven enterprise obviously knows how to collect, clean, curate a variety of meaningful data. But then it has capabilities to convert that data into actionable insight. It doesn't stop there though. It then has culture, which allows these actionable insights to be acted upon. Because ultimately it's those actions that drive outcome for the business. Because data without action is pretty useless. And so now let's switch gears and talk about how do we become data-driven. Now, some of the things that we often hear, and this list is slightly tongue-in-cheek, some of these are not actually bad ideas, and it may help your company become data-driven. But what is important to keep in mind is that it is not a checklist motion. There is really no magic wand to become a data-driven enterprise. It starts with a data-driven culture. And culture is much beyond your published mission and values. It's unstated behaviors and norms on how work gets done, how information is shared across your enterprise. This culture then has to be supported by a set of capabilities, from organization structure to how you decide to govern your data to what tools and technology you use to build your data platform. Now, many companies get the culture and capability right, but they do that for a line of business, maybe for a product, maybe for a project. What is important though is how do we scale it across the whole company and the whole enterprise? And so let me talk about several ways that companies are creating and scaling this culture and capability to become data-driven. And let's start with culture, because over 95% of executives believe that culture is the biggest impediment to becoming a data-driven enterprise. Only 5% of their challenges are technical or process-related in nature. So culture is really, really important. And the way I like to think about creating and scaling a data-driven culture is in terms of 4 E's. It starts with engagement, and engagement at the top. Unlike a lot of other initiatives, executive sponsorship in becoming data-driven is necessary but not sufficient. C-suite has to be visibly engaged and drive behavioral change right from the top in putting data to use to make decisions. And not just big decisions, but small everyday decisions. And then it's important for leadership to build mechanisms that allow this engagement in data-driven decision-making to scale beyond the senior leadership across the entire company. Let me share a couple of examples. You may have heard that at Amazon, we use narrative in writing process. If we have an idea, if you want to propose a change, we write what is called as PRFAQ, press release FAQ documents. What is important though is how we write them. We avoid using any of these words. We call them weasel words because they are subjective. They don't mean much. Instead, we use data and facts to state what we are trying to communicate in these documents. Now, this may sound like a small change, but it's a mechanism that allows everyone who works at Amazon across different businesses to adopt data-driven decision-making in the whole process. A second mental model that we use is one-way door versus two-way door decisions. Now, often we hear that executives are concerned that if they adopt becoming data-driven, that may slow down progress, and they fear getting into analysis paralysis. The mental model of one-way door versus two-way door allows us to use data while not compromising on speed. Simply put, a one-way door decision is not an easily reversible decision. That means you may probably want to wait for getting 80, 90% of the data or more. A two-way door decision, on the other hand, is an easily reversible decision. So you may want to take a leap of faith with maybe 50, 60% of the data. Get feedback and data from your customers, and then pivot as needed. After engagement, it comes down to enabling frontline action. We often hear about democratizing access to data. But what is more important is democratizing decisions based on this data. Instead of constantly having to move data up to where the decisions are, how do we push down and enable decision making at the front line where people are closest to your customers and closest to the data? And a fantastic example of a company adopting this frontline action is Epic Games. They have a massively popular game, Fortnite. Now, if you're not familiar, Fortnite is a free-to-play game. That means keeping and retaining gamers' engagement is very important. It's played by over 250 million gamers around the world. Now, they collect data from weapons that players are using, to the playtime, to different strategies that they're following in the game. And they have built the data analytics platform on AWS to store, analyze, and process this data. What is important though is they don't stop there. They actually make this data available to frontline game designers. So based on what is happening in the game, they can make decisions around introducing new weapon, maybe changing the layout of the game, or introducing new content to keep the engagement level up. So that's a wonderful example of not just amassing massive amount of data, but actually enabling frontline action using that data. The third part of creating a data-driven culture is education. Treating data proficiency as a core skill for the whole enterprise, not just for the roles that have data or analytics in their title. And there are some really fun ways that we have seen companies drive education at scale. There are companies who hold data hackathons. Well, they'll bring cross-functional group of people from not just technology and research, but also from finance and marketing and other divisions, and then give them data sets that they can relate to in their everyday lives. For example, traffic data or weather patterns or parking tickets or restaurant bookings. And then ask them to get answers to everyday questions. Like, find me a restaurant on a Friday night to go have a dinner with the least chance to get a parking ticket. What that allows and enables is people's ability to combine, play with data and combine multiple different data sources and then ask questions, which is then translated into solving business problems. The fourth E, and perhaps the most important one, is eliminating silos. Once again, we hear about data being in silos in different systems, in different functions. But it's the departmental and organizational silos that guard these system silos that are much harder to change and break. And it requires intentional change management on leadership part to eliminate these silos, so that data is treated as an asset for the whole organization and not a property of a particular department. And the example that I want to share there is from the media company A&E Networks. I was fortunate to be the global CTO for A&E. A&E is in a storytelling business. That means content is at the center of everything that they do. But as we all know, how we consume content is changing quite a bit. And so A&E was having a hard time getting answers to who the consumer is. How are they actually interacting and consuming our content? How are we making money? Because they're now making money from not just traditional businesses, but even from digital channels. What do we have in the basket to sell? And all of these questions were difficult to get answer to because data was sitting in different silos. And once again, these were not just system silos. These were departmental and functional silos. And so they made a top-down commitment right from the CEO down to change and adopt a data-driven culture and eliminate these silos. They enabled that by going with the mindset that they will enable more access to data across the whole company. And they built this using a platform they call Shomi on AWS. To build excitement and make it easier for people to interact with this data platform, they build Alexa skills and put different Echo devices all across the office called Tell Me, where people could interact and ask questions of their data layer. And the results were tremendous. And so there are a lot of ways companies are adopting to eliminate these silos, but driving intentional change to eliminate this silo is crucial. So we have talked about 4 E's of creating and scaling a data-driven culture. Engagement from the top and then building mechanism to scale that engagement. Enabling frontline action and decentralizing decision-making. Investing in education for the whole company around how to effectively use data and analytics. And then intentional change management effort to eliminate silos. Now, this culture has to be supported by a set of capabilities. And so let's talk about capabilities across how do we organize to get the most out of our data, how do we govern this data, and then what tools we use to execute. Let's start with organization. One of the trends that we've seen is companies centralizing as analytics COE and creating center of excellence functions where all of the requests are driven through these central functions. Creating these central functions as a community where cross-functional teams can come together, share their knowledge and best practices on how they are using data or solve business problems together using data is a good idea. But it's important to not let these functions become bottlenecks. The other thing that we see often is that data is split from IT. And regardless of in your organization and company, where data reports up to, it's very important to use IT's unique position in creating and driving data capabilities. Because IT has an end-to-end view of your business process, how different systems and applications and product connect with each other, and how information and data flows across the enterprise. So regardless of how you choose to structure your organization, it's important to leverage that unique position. One of the organizational models that we have seen get increasing traction is modern day data community. There are producers of data who are domain expert, and they're able to curate and publish data sets for the rest of the enterprise to use on a central data marketplace. This data marketplace is managed centrally by a team. They provide security, governance, a search catalog, and ease of use to both producers and consumers of data. And then the consumers of data are able to use this marketplace to search for different data sets that are available, and then choose them and use them to build machine learning model and analytics model to solve their business problems. The idea here is to create and err on the side of speed and agility by pushing responsibilities down to edges. The second part of creating data-driven capabilities is governance. If not done right, governance can actually become a hindrance in creating data-driven capabilities. It's about moving from the mindset of governing to restrict to governing to enable. The question should be, why shouldn't someone have access to this data, rather than why should they get access to this data? And there are valid reasons why somebody should not have access to the data, because of privacy, compliance, regulation, and that's fine. But what is important is to set the governance on the tenet of allowing better access and more access to data. Regulations around the world will continue to change. And it's important to build data lineage right from the get-go and as part of the design as you're building it, so that you're not going back and putting gatekeeping functions or remedial control in place. Investing in data lineage as well as data cataloging will save a lot of effort when it comes to security and privacy. The third part comes to execution. Great strategy with a terrible execution goes nowhere. And so when you're building the data platform and building data capabilities, instead of starting data forward, meaning let's collect all the data we can and then figure out what to do with it, start customer or business backward. Find out a problem or an opportunity, build out a strong hypothesis around that, figure out what data elements you need, and then work backward from that by bringing them in and experimenting with those. There is also a lot of focus on consuming data. But then many transactions within companies still happen outside of any system, and they're not captured anywhere. We still use a lot of spreadsheets and some back of the napkin transactions and data entry that we lose insight on. So a strong data strategy has to have accompanying application, product, and integration strategy to make sure that we are bringing automation and capturing right insight to then put them to use. And the final piece is around the platforms that you choose. The one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to your data layer does not scale and is outdated. It's important to use cloud and purpose-built databases that AWS provides because of the complexity of the environment we are in and the speed and agility and the flexibility that you need in terms of the tool of choice that you use to build your data platform. And AWS provide the most comprehensive analytics services that are out there, from S3 as a storage layer to a number of services like Redshift, to Amazon QuickSight for visualization, to Amazon SageMaker to build machine learning models. One example that brings a lot of what we have talked about together is car rental company Avis. Avis wanted to improve their operational efficiency while also creating better customer experience. Now that may sound like conflicting goals, hard to do both. And they had a ton of data from car fleet to external sources to their internal systems, but very limited insight. And so what they decided to do was they decided to run a field pilot at Newark Airport in New Jersey to observe the rental process and identify the data attributes that go into making the decision around rental. Using these attributes like model, make, mileage of the cars, color of the car sometimes, customer preferences, they built out a small machine learning model and put it in a mobile app to try and test it out. They then collected and learned about more data attributes and went and refined this optimization engine and then made it part of the rental application on the mobile. Using this experience, they were able to achieve both better customer experience, but better operational efficiency as well. They're planning to scale this across different locations this year. And so we have talked about how to create and scale data-driven culture, and then support that with a set of capabilities across your organization, governance, and execution. The question then is, how do you get started? Well, we have seen how different companies across different industries look at becoming data-driven. But define what data-driven means to your company. And not in terms of being data-driven as a goal, but identify something real, a business outcome where data can help and then align around that. Especially when you're starting out, assigning a single-threaded leader, someone who wakes up and goes to sleep thinking about just that one thing, is very important, especially in driving and influencing the culture change. Commit to driving this culture change top down. And then pick an important but not urgent use case. Build a strong hypothesis around that. Identify data that you need to solve for it. Bring it in AWS, run some analytics, make sure to take action on that, and then continue to iterate and incrementally build your data capabilities as well as data platform. We have a program called Data-Driven Everything, D2E, that can help customers start with this journey and building your data flywheel. Please ask your account teams about the program. I would like to thank you for listening in. There are a number of resources for executive education as well as staying connected with other resources from Enterprise Strategy team. There are also a number of training resources available to get started on your data analytics journey. Thank you so much, and please don't forget to fill out the survey. Thank you.